In the highly regulated life sciences industry, contract manufacturers face the dual challenge of ensuring product quality while maintaining efficiency across diverse production lines. And now, one way to meet these challenges is by integrating quality management systems with manufacturing execution systems on a unified platform. Now, this integration enhances real-time decision-making, compliance, and product consistency, which are all critical for meeting regulatory standards and safety requirements. I'm Miles Skoda. This is the Pharmaceutical Online webinar series, and today we're talking revolutionizing contract manufacturing with a unified QMS and MES platform. Joining me for this presentation are two industry experts from MasterControl. First, Katie Farley, Senior Product Management Director, and Caitlin Minton-Smith, Senior Product Marketing Manager, who together will cover how integrating quality and manufacturing functions on a unified platform ensures seamless connectivity. They'll look at how flexible systems support life science manufacturers in managing production of multiple products, and cover the specific features and functionalities of a platform that caters to high variability life sciences manufacturing. Now, we'll be holding a Q&A session following this presentation. Please feel free to submit questions as we go along. We'll get to as many as possible during that Q&A, and any that we don't get to, we'll follow up on after the event. And then just a bit of housekeeping: if you run into any issues today, please try refreshing your browser first. If your problem persists, submit a question through the Q&A, and I'll help get you back on track. And then finally, this event will be available on demand, usually within a day, often less. You'll get an email with a link to it, or you can just use the same link that you used today. So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to get started.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here today with y'all to talk just a little bit about how contract manufacturers can benefit from a unified quality and manufacturing system. So today we are going to touch a little bit on some of the unique requirements for contract manufacturers, what it can look like, and some of those benefits when you start to unify quality and manufacturing. And we will dive into some proof points and some metrics from one of our clients. So this idea that CMOs are only as good as their last batch is actually something that came out of a conversation I was having with a customer during our annual user conference a couple weeks ago. We were talking about how contract manufacturers are not only required to design and develop these products to really high levels of quality and compliance, but they also have an additional responsibility to their clients and sponsors. And this can add an extra layer of pressure to every single batch or lot that is produced. And this is really kind of an area that contract manufacturers differ from other manufacturers who maybe handle their manufacturing in-house, is this need and desire to have an advanced level of harmonization between your quality and manufacturing systems. I'm going to pass it over to Katie for a little bit to talk a little bit more about some of these unique needs.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so Caitlin already talked about a couple of ways in which contract manufacturing is unique. And to get into some more specific areas, you can see 4 of those listed here. So the first one that I think is really important is configurability. So likely you are working through different product requests from your customers, and you are manufacturing lots of different variations of products. It is unlikely that you just have one product that you manufacture day in and day out on a continuous line. So the ability to have a configurable solution that's going to meet those varying needs coming from your customers is really important. Additionally, as you bring on more customers, you do need a solution that is going to enable the different customer requirements. That's going to help onboard those customers in an efficient way as well. The next need is around scalability. So the ability to more easily scale up or down based on demands. If there is, for example, a delay, you want to make sure that you minimize that, because ultimately that could easily end up impacting all customers. As we think about the need to scale up and down and the changing market requirements, an example that comes to mind immediately for me, and I'm sure for many of you, is COVID. That was just 3 or 4 years ago. I'm sure many of you had to go from 0 to 60 at really unprecedented speeds. And This is where it's so important to think about what is the right solution for you and make sure that you're doing this in advance, that you have a good process and good solutions in place versus waiting until it's forced upon you, which I think is what a lot of people experienced during COVID, and where the ability to scale really is so important. And along with that, I think cost efficiency as well. It does have to make financial sense as you bring on more business and ensure that the processes and systems that you have in place are really ready to receive the benefits of scale as you bring on more customers and manufacture more products on their behalf. The other area is flexibility, which does have a lot of overlap with configurability. So this is where likely you, like I mentioned earlier, you're not manufacturing one single product. I'm sure you're manufacturing many of them. And as I've talked to many of our different contract manufacturing customers at MasterControl, I often hear that these are batches that may only be ran 1, 2, maybe 3 times and never again. So you do have to have a solution that is going to enable that level of flexibility. Additionally, being able to respond quickly to customers as they come to you with new requests and new needs is really important. Every customer demand in many ways is entirely unique on its own. And again, there can be different factors outside of just the customers that might change the market demands. Again, we can think of COVID here. Do you have the flexibility to quickly adjust to some of these changes that are coming from customers or from other external forces as well? Again, just making sure that you have the right processes, the right digital solutions in place to support that. And then last but not least is visibility. So real-time oversight into production is critically important for all of life science manufacturing. But for contract manufacturers, there is that extra layer where it's not just internal ability to see real time, but also you likely have external folks, such as your customers, that are interested in a certain level of visibility as well. And it's important that you're able to support that. Quality assurance, making sure that you have the right quality in place and that there's visibility into your quality and into your quality processes. That's really going to help build trust between you and the companies that you work with. And then I'll talk about this in more detail later during the presentation, but in terms of visibility, we also see that different clients are going to want to be involved at varying levels throughout the process of engaging with you. So that could be through the approval of the templates, just maybe the review and release process. Maybe they just ultimately want the documentation when it's all said and done. But that is something that's really unique to contract manufacturing as well. And the requirement really to deal with the visibility that is required on behalf of your customers.
Those are all such good points, Katie, and I think that they really exemplify how contract manufacturing kind of operates under a bit of a different paradigm than a more traditional or in-house manufacturing company, where they're just producing maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 kind of products over and over again. We know that for contract manufacturers, meeting the standards for both your customers and the regulatory agencies that oversee them really leaves no room or time for errors or delays. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes, right, of what we're going to talk about today. It's this key challenge of lack of alignment in these spaces where your objectives, your workflows, and your data start to overlap between product development, quality management, and your manufacturing operations. On the quality side, most of you probably have or know of a QMS. This is really where you are going to keep those documents, those SOPs and those specifications. You are going to keep your procedures and work instructions. All of your quality events like CAPAs or deviations or non-conformance reports, and all of the training records and certifications of the people that not only work in your production facilities, but also just overall in your organization. The purpose of this quality manufacturing system is really to ensure that compliance, the compliance with those regulatory agencies. It's there to manage your quality processes. And overall, it really mitigates your risk by having a single source of truth and being able to really track and trace and have everything in one place that is global and goes out to your entire enterprise. The other kind of critical system that we talk about when we're talking about disconnected systems is a manufacturing execution system or electronic batch record. And this is where you are going to keep that information about your production records, your master templates, any recipe management or variations to those master templates, what your equipment usage looks like, your maintenance, your calibration, and really anything that's happening during the production process. And the purpose of this is really to capture that operational data and really everything that's happening during manufacturing, and ideally using that information to improve your consistency, to improve your traceability, and to improve your quality. These two systems are hypercritical for manufacturers. And they have some overlap. So QMS wants some things for manufacturing potentially, but we absolutely know that manufacturing needs some things from that quality management system, such as visibility or access into existing quality events like a deviation, and really training on those SOPs and those specifications and access to those SOPs and specifications. When we talk with our clients kind of across the board, our manufacturing clients, 4 things bubble to the surface when they are working in a disconnected system. And when we talk about disconnected systems, that could really be that you've got paper in your organization, you are using some sort of paper-based quality management and paper-based batch record. It could mean that one or the other is digitized, but one or the other is still on paper, or it could mean that both of them are digitized, but they are still disconnected. And so when we talk about disconnected systems, that's kind of what we mean. And 4 of the things that we often hear that bubble to the surface as issues are compliance issues and compliance gaps. We often hear about kind of increased cost, and that can be the cost of having 2 disparate systems, or potentially even the cost of what it looks like when you miss something. It tends to introduce additional audit risks, which nobody wants. And finally, it really hinders the ability to have clear visibility and insights into both your quality and your manufacturing processes. I think a couple really good examples of these issues is, thinking about compliance gaps. So when you rely on 2 disparate systems and you rely on some level of manual data transfer, this can really increase the risk of errors and can impact your data integrity. These things can result in something like a 483 that none of us want. Another way that this kind of comes about in a real world example is the idea of visibility. And Katie already talked a little bit about this. That not being able to see everything that's happening in kind of a single system can really cause a lot of disconnect, not only within your organization, and that can impact production, that can impact throughput, things like that, but it can also impact that visibility with your sponsors. And depending on the level of involvement that they want during production, that visibility can have either some little impact or a lot of impact on how pleased they are and how satisfied they are with you as their manufacturing partner. And then finally, it can be really difficult to align on things like quality events. So quality events happen. They happen in production, they happen outside of production. And things like deviations are really important and really critical to understand in the course of production. And the ability to have a single source of truth and share that information with future lots, future runs, future shifts is really, really important. And when you have a disconnected system, that becomes very, very challenging. The purpose of connecting these systems is really to kind of seamlessly and fluidly see your data and to see seamlessly and fluidly how these two systems interact, where their interaction points are, and how that can improve and how that improves your operational efficiency.
Yeah, great points, Caitlin. And that reminds me actually of a conversation that I had with some customers at our recent user conference in Salt Lake City a couple weeks ago. There's several contract manufacturers actually that I spoke to, and they all expressed a similar sentiment, which was they really felt like as they've rolled out solutions that connect quality and manufacturing, that they've really found it to be a competitive advantage for them as a manufacturer. And they're able to show their customers and potential future customers the value of a connected solution, something that honestly a lot of people don't have today, right? Whether they're on paper or they just have a QMS and MES solution that is completely disconnected and not integrated. So they found that to be extremely helpful when it comes to getting new customers and retaining existing ones, which makes a lot of sense, but still is an interesting comment to think about. And then the other side to that is they found it helpful not only for the customer side of things, which I just spoke about, but also interestingly for employee retention. So we are all used to technology in our everyday lives, from our smartphones that we use and engage with every day in different ways. And then you can think about how difficult it is for people. And I'm sure many of you are in this situation today as well. You go to your work environment and in many ways, you're switching back to a paper process, right? Back to what we were doing sort of decades ago in other areas in many ways. And so having a digital solution that's providing the visibility and the data access really helps with employee retention as well. So with that, let's move to a new section here and look at some specific capabilities and outcomes that you can expect to achieve by unifying quality and manufacturing. So the first one is data integrity. This is an area that's so important and something where we see really a lot of time is spent in this area. And Caitlin talked earlier about 483s. This is actually a leading cause of 483s are issues related to data integrity. So this really is a big deal. Now, as you're seeing the video here, you may be noticing certain things as you're looking at the video. And I want to point out that there are a lot of things that are going to be automatically taken care of in a digital solution that you have to worry about if you are using paper-based processes today, or potentially another digital solution that may not be taking care of these things. So that is typically things like all steps are completed. You cannot move forward until every single step has been complete. Everything is going to be legible, of course. In a paper world, you are likely dealing with illegible handwriting, wrong formatting of dates, things like that. Correction workflows not applicable. All of those need to follow a certain process, which in a digital system, you do have the ability to enforce those. The other big area that we see from a data integrity perspective being incredibly important are things like calculation, precision, and just calculations in general, right? Having a validated solution that's going to perform those automatically, removing the need for people to do those manually. So those are huge. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with, or maybe even have experienced directly these stories where, you have to track down someone from production. You got to pull them off the line to go make a correction because handwriting was illegible or a note didn't make sense. And then that person actually turns out to be out of the office for the next week. And you're waiting to release a batch on that person being gone. So just an example of some of the pain points that can come about today with the data, without some of the data integrity capabilities that we're talking about here. Oftentimes, these data integrity things are sometimes the things that we see organizations not really take the time to impact or quantify the impact and cost of, but they are really important in understanding how time is spent and where different quality concerns can arise. And I think data integrity is so critical for contract manufacturing because you're manufacturing on behalf of another organization. And you want to maintain that trust, like we talked about earlier. And that trust is going to come from showing that you do have data integrity in the processes that you are performing on their behalf. And data integrity, when you have a connected system, is going to help address many of these types of errors that are going to be costly to you and your customer. And as we have seen on the MasterControl side, customers implement solutions that do connect quality and manufacturing and do address a lot of these data integrity errors that I've talked about on this slide. We have seen a reduction in GDP areas by 90%, sometimes more. So really great outcomes that can come from a reduction in data integrity issues through implementing a digital solution. The next area here is quality controls, and this is where having the integration and the ability to connect to a quality management solution is extremely helpful. So we can think about some of the most obvious examples like SOPs and work instructions. You want to be able to link to an SOP so that an operator can just click something within the production solution and have it open maybe another tab or have it open that SOP or work instruction directly. So they're not having to reference paper, they're not having to open the QMS and search for a document and navigate within the QMS to find it. Additionally, when you can have a dynamic link, it makes it so that if you have a new revision of an SOP, for example, you don't have to go and revise every single template in order to make that update. The other item that you may have observed in the demo video here is a training check. So what you're seeing is the system is checking the training requirements for the operator based on the process in that section, and then saying, hey, you cannot perform anything here because you are not trained, and forcing them to go and do that training, which is of huge benefit because ensuring that training has been completed appropriately post-production is a really time-consuming activity. And then even worse, right, is the case that someone potentially wasn't trained and performed an activity anyway, something that's incredibly hard to control when you don't have those quality and manufacturing solutions or learning management potentially connected to your manufacturing solution. The other area is looking at quality events like deviations, like Caitlin was talking about, and having that native link between that and the production record or the batch record or the specific area of manufacturing that is impacted by that. As you are, for example, completing a deviation, you're likely documenting things like, this is the product that is impacted. This is the date range that this is impactful for. These are the specific lot numbers that were impacted by this deviation. And in a disconnected system, what ends up happening is there's some sort of process to make sure that all of that impact information is understood and then appropriately applied during production. So that's pretty tricky, right? That's a pretty manual process for someone to cross-reference dates, cross-reference lot numbers. But when you have those solutions connected, that's some of the benefits you're going to get, right? Because there will be an understanding that these are the lots that are impacted. This is the date range of that deviation or the temporary instruction or whatever the use case may be. So that one, I think, is an example that is talked about less often when it comes to quality and production record integration, but I think is really, really important just because the cost of missing something like that is pretty extensive. So the next one we're looking at here is process control. So the idea of ensuring that you have a standardized process for people, material, and equipment that is going into your manufacturing processes, of course, is so important, and especially with the oversight from your customers. And there are a lot of tools out there that are really helpful to support contract manufacturers in this need. MasterControl has worked with several of our contract manufacturing customers to develop solutions that really enable the scalability, flexibility, and visibility that is required for process control. So I'm going to talk through a few examples of those here. The first one that you can see in the video, so this is actually an example of what we call product families. And this capability allows you to build kind of a single base template and then build into that template where there are variations based on the specific product variation or the specific product family. So in one template, you can have X number of variations that are housed within that just by going in and tweaking, you know, this is the bottle amount that's required, or this is the packaging label that's required for this variation. Typically in a paper world, this is handled in kind of a painful way, and that's usually either through you just have a lot of templates to encompass all of those variations, or you may have a bunch of steps that are then made not applicable depending on the different product variation that you're selecting. Both of those suboptimal. I think this is a use case that's extremely common for contract manufacturing and something that's handled really gracefully in a digital solution. The other couple that come to mind are what we call global elements. And this is when you have a standardized process. Let's take a line clearance, for example. So you may manufacture hundreds of products, but they're all going through the same line clearance. So a tool like this will allow you to build out that standard process and then have it be dynamically referenced wherever it's used. That way, if you have to update that line clearance, you're not going in and making that update 100 times. You're able to go just directly to that one line clearance, make the update. It's going to be dynamically updated everywhere that references it. So that's another huge win. And then the third type of capability to look for here is the ability to build out and customize parameters. So we developed a feature set here in collaboration with one of the top CDMOs in Asia. And in their case, they have a pretty standard process, but their customers are continually sending them varying parameters that they want them to run through production. And this is a case where they're likely only running that batch, you know, 1 or 2, maybe 3 times. And with the parameter tool and the ability to identify what those parameters are, whether they're text, numeric values, numeric limits, to identify those and update them just in one location as they're getting the parameters from their customers, really help standardize those templates, ensure that all the parameters were being updated in the same place, and prevent them from having to create a new template every single time they got new parameters from their customers. So just a few examples of some of the tools and capabilities that can support contract manufacturers. And I think a lot of the things I talked about are going to be helpful for many different types of manufacturing, but I think especially for contract manufacturing, these types of tools can have an even bigger impact. So the other area that we look at is review and release. This is typically a pretty big pain point in the industry. And if we think back to data integrity and some of the things we talked about just a couple minutes ago, you know, when we ask people, what are you spending time on when you're reviewing? It's often a lot of the things that we've already discussed in this presentation that would actually be automatically taken care of if you have a digital solution and if you have your quality and your manufacturing solutions connected. So those are things like training checks, right? You no longer have to check, was every employee trained? Were there any deviations associated with this batch? You're going to know that already as you're going into review or even prior. And then all of the things like calculations, is every step complete, etc. All of that's taken care of already. So that's really where this concept of review by exception comes in. So if we look at the video here, we are not reviewing every single line, but just the exception. So you can see the corrections, steps that have failed, any AQL defects. Of course, you'll want to review notes that have been added, any numeric limits that have been exceeded. All of that is here in this running dashboard per production records. This is especially important because it's an area where you can really see great improvements in the way that resources are used, the ability to get products out the door faster, get them to your customers faster, especially when margins are tight. It's really important to understand where can you get turn around quickly and get that value and the ROI effectively as quickly as possible. I think another thing to point out here is with this dashboard view and with the visibility that is provided with this type of solution, you're able to find issues and potentially work with your customer earlier. There's no need to wait until the end or send them the paper, and then eventually at that point you may or may not find an issue. We have actually found that a lot of our contract manufacturing customers have been extremely receptive to utilizing review by exception, and that their customers who are involved in that review process have actually been extremely receptive to it as well, because for a lot of reasons, because it's risk-based, it's really the way the industry is moving, and ultimately it's going to save time and effort on both sides, both for you and your customer. And then the last area here is data visibility. So from a contract manufacturing perspective, of course, you want to make sure that it's easy to share certain information with your customers, and that you have a solution that is going to give them the visibility that they need, even in the middle of a production cycle, rather than the process that a lot of people are involved in today, which is unfortunately waiting till the end of production and then sharing a paper document with their customers. This type of solution can also surface deviations and exceptions, like I just talked about, giving you the opportunity to work through these things real time rather than having to wait till the end. And what you see in the video here is just an example of a dashboard that is showing production status, so that you have a view, or your customer has a view of where each batch is in the cycle. Another important point here is you do want to make sure that there are data segregation capabilities as well. You don't want to give every customer access to everyone's data. You want to make sure that someone can log in and see only what's relevant to them. And we know from working with our clients, from industry research that we've read and been involved in, that giving sponsors that type of visibility is so important, and also really is another area of competitive advantage for you as a contract manufacturer. When it comes to visibility, I also talked about earlier the varying requirements from customers in terms of how they want to be involved in the review process. That may be approving master templates, that may be just being involved in the review and release process, or potentially they just want to see the documentation when it's over. That depends largely on the customer and what their requirements are. But making sure that you implement a solution that's going to meet the needs of not only you, but your customers, and the way that you work and collaborate together is so important. I talked to another customer at our user conference a couple weeks ago. This is a quality QMS customer of MasterControl who doesn't actually manufacture themselves, but works with 5 or 6 different manufacturers throughout their value chain. And currently, this is all a paper-based process. They complete manufacturing, they get the paper document when it's all done. They were very excited to hear that one of these vendors was actually implementing an electronic batch record solution. And then, in turn, we're actually really disappointed to find out that this particular solution didn't offer a way for them to have visibility, didn't offer even an export capability so that they had more concise access to that production data. And ultimately, they ended up having to take screenshots from the application and share that with a customer, which actually was worse than the paper documentation that they were familiar with previously. So I think that's just an interesting lesson in making sure that we're evaluating solutions appropriately to make sure that they are meeting the needs of the customers that you guys work with in the way that they want to collaborate and engage. Okay, and with that, I will pass it off to Caitlin to talk through a customer story.
Thanks so much, Katie. I think it's probably pretty clear that Katie and I could talk about why a kind of single quality and manufacturing platform benefits contract manufacturers pretty much all day, because this is what we do. We talk about how things can, how our products and how digitization can really benefit life science providers and manufacturers in the industry. However, I do firmly believe that it is better to show rather than tell. So I wanted to take you through some results, some metrics from one of our clients, a global pharma contract manufacturer. So just a little bit about this particular contract manufacturer. They have been in operation for 9 years, almost 10. They've got 1,300 employees and 4 global facilities. So they are not the largest contract manufacturer out there, but they are a decently sized contract manufacturer. In terms of the products that they produce, they have 150 SKUs in production, and they release about 1,400 batches per month. Since they implemented MasterControl's manufacturing solution a couple of years ago, they have released over 65,000 batches. So really this snapshot is simply intended to show you kind of the scope of what they're producing and what they're working with. They wanted to really harmonize a lot of their data, and they wanted to harmonize their quality and manufacturing for all of the reasons that we've talked about, all of those benefits that they could get. They had purchased our QMS quite a few years ago and started to look at what an electronic batch record or electronic kind of manufacturing execution system could really do for their organization. And 3 of the areas where they saw the most impact was in their training, in their operations, and really what automation did for their business. Like I said, they did start with our QMS, and before MasterControl, their training was incredibly disconnected. It was mostly paper-based. They had these trainings weekly or monthly, and this is really for the entire organization. When they implemented our QMS, they saw improvements. They saw a lot of improvements, especially around being able to keep all those records and all that information in a single place. However, these trainings were still scheduled. And this meant that they could have operators on the production line who weren't necessarily trained on what was being manufactured at that time. This is particularly impactful for contract manufacturers because, as we've noted, you are going to most often be running multiple products for multiple clients simultaneously. When they started to adopt our manufacturing solution, they were able to implement these inline dynamic training checks. Like Katie mentioned, this automatically flags if an operator isn't trained on whatever task they're performing. And this results in a couple different outcomes. So as Katie mentioned, they can't move forward. So if they're not trained, they cannot move forward with that production. The second outcome is that they didn't have to leave the line. So while this customer's training had been digitized when they adopted our QMS, if an operator was found to not be trained, they would still have to leave the line to go complete that training. Having this inline check meant that whatever device they were on, whatever workstation they were on, they were able to complete their training right there. And then finally, all of that documentation and all of that training information is captured and stored in the QMS. So there's that single source there that can be shown to, auditors. It can be shown to whomever needs to see it. Since implementing our MES, this client has launched 176,000 training checks. Technically, that number is 176,838 training checks. But let's just call it over 170,000. And this is just the training checks from the production record. So this doesn't include all of the other trainings that happen outside of the course of production. And that is over 170,000 moments where that training could have been missed, resulting in some poor outcomes, some of which Katie highlighted. The next area where they saw pretty remarkable improvements was in their operational efficiencies. I think we all know that change is the name of the game for many contract manufacturers. You are beholden to a lot of customers, you're beholden to a lot of clients, and a lot of products. And that is why having systems that are flexible and connected and configurable and scalable are so important. Before adopting our MES, this contract manufacturer was using a paper system. So they had their digital quality management, but a paper-based EBR. And they had over 200 paper templates. To update just one of those, it took about 2 months. So you can imagine that if there was something that crossed multiple templates, let's say like something global that Katie mentioned earlier, like a line clearance, that if one template takes you 2 months to update and go through all of the approvals, imagine what would happen if that touched 200 templates or even 50 of those templates. It's going to take you months. As they adopted kind of this connected system and a digital manufacturing platform and started using some of the tools like product families, they were able to reduce their master templates to 10. So those 10 master templates take care of those 150 plus SKUs. They're able to really use the capabilities of the system to streamline their operations. And what they found is that to touch all 10 of those, if it's needed, takes about 2 weeks to update. So that is, I don't know, to me, pretty insane. Number one, that you're able to go from 200 to 10 master templates, but then also you're able to really see these efficiencies around updates. For them, this has resulted in some really, awesome outcomes, obviously, but has really shown the power of the system for a contract manufacturer. They deeply, deeply believe in product families. They use one template for multiple uses. They have bought into things like global elements where they can update something in one place and it goes across the entire system. And at the end of the day, they're really embracing the idea of continuous improvement. So over the past couple of years, they've completed over 300 template revisions. This is something that never would have been possible in their old paradigm. And this is really enabling them to work faster and to work smarter, and is letting them see, a level of visibility and a level of cohesion across their manufacturing quality that they didn't have before. The final area where this particular client saw a lot of impact was the return on automation. So simply by taking advantage of some of the embedded automation capabilities with MasterControl, they were able to save a lot of time on seemingly insignificant tasks. So Katie earlier mentioned margins, and we know from talking with our contract manufacturing clients that most contract manufacturers operate on relatively tight margins. And so as Katie noted, finding those areas where you can reduce the time it takes to do something, even if it's by 30 seconds, it starts to add up over time. Things like calculations that typically take longer, things like integrations where you have to pull data over manually, and things as simple as like date and time capture really, really add up when you start to do them 1 million times in a year or 10 million times in a year. So what you're seeing here is actually the results that this customer saw over the course of a single year. Over the course of this year, just by, like I said, using those embedded automations, they saved over 10 million minutes, which just let that sink in. 10 million minutes, that's a lot of minutes. That equals nearly $3.5 million. That's what those minutes equal. With the newfound efficiencies that they have gained, they've actually been able to reallocate some of their resources to work on value add activities rather than pushing paper as they were doing before. One thing about automation is that it has such a huge impact on product quality. And Katie really highlighted and underscored this idea of quality and why it is so critical. And what automation gives you is it gives you a higher quality, it gives you not only a higher quality product, but it also gives you more confidence in the quality of what you're producing by minimizing errors, by minimizing kind of manual tasks. I'm going to stop there with this customer example, but I do hope that it's given you an idea or kind of a snapshot of what this looks like in the real world and how it might be able to impact your business, whether that's from an error reduction standpoint, a data integrity standpoint, improvements to throughput or improvements to quality, one or all of the above. Hopefully you can start to see and put yourself into some of these situations where you can understand how a unified system can really start to benefit your specific business.
So we talked a lot about some specific value propositions and different examples that Caitlin spoke to help drive home the idea that harmonizing quality and manufacturing systems is so important, not only for your success as an organization, but also to help with the competitive advantage that it will provide for your organization as well. Working in different systems for quality and manufacturing can cause a lot of the headaches that we talked about, while unifying them does really present a lot of opportunities for your organization moving forward and a lot of the benefits that we talked about. So we hope with the learnings from this presentation that we encourage you to understand what are the metrics that matter and evaluate against them of all of the different capabilities that we talked about and some of the advantages of unifying quality and manufacturing. What is important to you? What would be most impactful to your business? Each of you is very unique. So make sure that you take the time to consider some of the things that we mentioned, like visibility, data integrity, process controls, and the other things that we talked about to make the best decision for your organization moving forward. With that, we really appreciate your time. And I think that we have a couple of questions that we can answer.
All right. Yeah. Caitlin and Katie, this was a great presentation. I mean, looking at that slide with the return on automation was fascinating, and to see how much, is truly saved with just shaving minutes off of each thing is awesome. I'm going to get into some questions here, audience members. Submit your questions. It should be on the left side of your screen through that Q&A box. In addition, if you want to reach out to our speakers or connect with them, their info should be on the right side. You can click on, the LinkedIn links or the email and contact them directly if you have something you want to ask more specifically and maybe not here. And then additional resources available on your screen as well. But with that, let's get into these questions. We've got time for a few for sure. And so the first one I'm seeing is, I guess I would phrase this. So how do your customers utilize electronic tools to collaborate with their customers?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. So there's a couple of different ways. I think one of the low-hanging fruits would be the ability to just have an export that can be shared with a customer. So I shared the story of the organization who was working with contract manufacturers, and they implemented a solution where they didn't provide the basic export capability. So I think that's one of the first things to evaluate is, what are you ultimately required to deliver to a customer, and what is that going to look like after you've implemented a solution that's going to unify quality and manufacturing. Outside of that, the other areas to look at are visibility. So what type of visibility do you want to provide? And that can be through dashboarding, that could be through scheduled reports, that could be through giving customers access to log in somewhere or not, right? There might be a way that you can send them a report directly. So there's lots of different ways to go about that. The other thing in terms of a tool would be the ability to collaborate on documents. So that could be the template, and then the ability to collaborate on the review process. What does that involvement look like? Do you want them leaving comments, or, how do you want that review process to look, and how can you engage in a collaborative and efficient way with your customers?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Katie. Let's see, I've got another one here. So what are the most common integrations that are prioritized?
I can take this one. So I would say on the manufacturing side is certainly where I'm most familiar, right, with our integrations. And I think that there are two integrations that our customers really, really seek out and and a lot of people ask about. And one of them is to an enterprise resource planning software, so an ERP, where they really keep all of the information about their asset management and kind of just resourcing. And that's really important in a manufacturing context to be able to pull through, what materials are available, understand and make sure that you have enough for whatever production run you have, and then being able to kind of feedback or backflush that information back into the ERP about what was consumed during the course of production. The other one that I think is really, really important, and customers oftentimes want to take advantage of this integration, is integration with assets. So whether that is pulling information from something like a scale or a mixer or some kind of environmental monitoring, just those ways I think that reduce manual data entry seems to be where our clients really gravitate. And that's one of those beautiful things about a digital tool, is that you no longer have to rely on manually looking at one piece of paper, another piece of paper, or manually looking at the scale and then transcribing that in what I'm sure is everyone's perfect and beautiful handwriting. You can just pull those things through automatically. And then again, in a digital system with us, is that you can use those values further along in your production record as well. So they're not just like a one-time thing. They can actually be utilized throughout the course of production in certain ways. So I would say that those two are the ones that we hear the most. Obviously, there are dozens of them, but those would be the top two, I think.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. Makes sense. Let's see. I think we can fit maybe a couple more in here. So what are some of the average return on automations numbers that you've seen for your CMO customers?
I can take that one, Katie.
Great.
I think we saw it in one of those last slides, is that when we talk about return on automation, it tends to not be these big sweeping things. It's not like I saved 3 hours on this thing, unless you're looking at something like review by exception. It's really about the seconds and the minutes that are saved because you are using digital tools and because you are using kind of a fully integrated system. Whether that integration, like I said, happens between your QMS and your MES on that single unified platform, or those integrations, those third-party integrations or third-party apps. So it's hard to say like the average return on automation because it's so unique for every customer. What I can say is that I think even we continue to be shocked when we look at where customers automate and how they automate and the time savings, and for them what that translates to in terms of dollar savings. It never gets old to look at it, and it never becomes less surprising. And sometimes even we look at the data and we're like, that can't possibly be right because it feels like 10 million minutes is like this mind-blowing number like I showed you, but it really is those seconds. Those seconds add up, those minutes add up. And it reminds me of a story that somebody was talking about on main stage at our user conference, and they were talking about a line that they thought that they had optimized as much as possible, and they were able to eke out 25% more production off of it because of digitizing, because they have a unified system. And a lot of that comes down to those automations and just those kind of embedded tools and stuff like that. So average, hard to say, but it really is surprising how minutes and seconds add up.
All right, let's try to get one more here. So I guess it seems like what this person's asking is what's it look like in terms of the overall process, or what's the lift for for putting in an integrated system, putting something in place like that? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's look at specifically some of the things that Caitlin and I mentioned that would be some of those integration points. So as we look at like documents, for example, right? So what are the work instructions, SOPs that are referenced in production? you're already doing that anyways. So that's really no extra lift. It's just that you have that ability to reference those directly versus writing it out or printing it out as you're issuing a batch. The other area we talked about is training. The way that the MasterControl solution works, as an example, is those documents are connected to training already. So we understand based on the document that's linked if there's training required. So that's not an extra lift either. You aren't required to go set up specific training requirements on each step. As an example, although that could be a requirement depending on the solution that's being implemented. And I think ultimately the benefits that would be received, like we've talked about, would far outweigh some of that upfront effort. And then the other major one that we talked about are those quality events like deviations. That's really done not in advance, right? But when those occur, in which case just making sure that you have the ability to do those connections and validating those. And then it's really no additional effort from an implementation standpoint because those are more ad hoc or as needed. And I think, based on all of the benefits that we discussed of implementing a solution that unifies quality and manufacturing, although there may be a little bit of effort initially to make sure that you have the connections and the right integration points and you're validating those experiences and the functional requirements, ultimately the benefit that you'll get will far outweigh the small amount of upfront effort that might occur.
All right, Katie, I think that's perfect. And I think that's a great place for us to stop. And so with that, again, wanted to thank you both for joining me today. Katie Farley, Caitlin Minton-Smith, appreciate everything. This was a great presentation and a lot of great information packed into here. And so with that, audience members, thank you so much as well for joining us. We appreciate your time and your attendance today. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.